we had the Merton call. It's supposedly what in 20 minutes, right?
Yeah, at 4, I think.
Okay.
Are you guys both? Are you guys both at Merton then?
Yeah.
Milo, Theo,
Yeah.
and I are Merton. So
Okay, nice.
Shanak is a big train enthusiast. So if you have a train question about any British train network or whatever, you should ask him.
We should probably get started because it doesn't look like anyone more is trickling in.
Sure. Okay. Why don't you kick us off?
Sorry, what was that?
Why don't you kick us off? Let's.
Oh, right. Okay. I don't have the slides in front of me, so I don't know quite what's next. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Hopefully this will just give you a bit of advice about the applications process and more importantly about the importance of the TSA and how to sort of do well in the TSA, because that is essential for securing an interview and it then helps in getting a place beyond that. So yeah, this is the agenda. I guess, do you want to go through this?
Sure. So we'll the host committee will briefly introduce themselves. We will talk about just very top level the application process to Oxford, the relevant timeline and deadlines. We're going to do a quick fact or myth to stress how important the TSA is. And then we're going to review the homework, the assigned homework as a group. So the questions 1, 3, 4, 7, I think we're going to skip number 8 actually. So we're going to do 1, 3, 4, 7 as a group. That's the problem set. And then we're going to break out into 2 separate groups to work on the 2008 past paper. So I hope all of you guys have done the past paper. Make sure you have it, your answers. Even if you don't have it, it's okay. Your group leaders will have it on the screen. And we're going to go over 3 types of critical thinking questions, as you can see there, which is identify the main conclusion. And then group 2 will go over matching arguments and applying principles. Then we'll have a general discussion very briefly. I'll talk about the homework that is assigned in advance of the next workshop, whenever that will be. Some of the hosts will have extra time to stay behind and answer other general questions that you may have, and we're happy to talk to you. I'll be here. I'll be happy to talk to anyone. And those who need to go can go and have dinner or breakfast or sleep. So, okay. Someone want to take the slide? Jonah?
Yep. Okay. So why Oxford? I guess, this is a little slide as to why, you should actually be thinking of applying for somewhere like Oxford. And we all consider it the best university in the world. And that is partly because we got in. Otherwise, if we hadn't, we might not have said the same. But actually, the thing is, there are so many good things about Oxford, and as well as the more perhaps trivial side of things, such as the architecture that it has and the prestige that it has and all those kind of things that make it very appealing. One of the things is that it's just an unbelievable opportunity to increase your educational process of thinking, and it actually gives you an opportunity to solve problems in a subject that you care about. Now, if you're looking at the TSA, then this is about E&M and PPE. And, in those 2 subjects, there are so many world problems that actually we could address. And that Oxford is probably one of the best places, and we'd say the best place, to actually be able to knuckle down and get into that tutorial system. And one of the things about tutorial system, which it says there, is that basically the main form of teaching at Oxford is that you are with one other person, usually 1, sometimes 2, but generally one other person with one professor, going over an essay that you might have been set, or going over a problem that you've been assigned. And that is very rare. I mean, generally Oxford are the only 2 universities that do that at that more local level. And so that's just an opportunity that's unrivaled, and something that if you want to involve yourself in that intensity of intellectual discussion to solve those problems, it's definitely something that you'd be considering. And other things that are mentioned there, you have an international community of like-minded scholars and academics. There's so many world-leading professors. The reputation for employment is incredibly, important, obviously, and something that you definitely get that's unrivaled. And the college system, is also very something that I think is very appealing. So basically, if you don't know, Oxford is, you don't apply to the university, but you apply to a specific college. So the university is composed of about 38 different colleges, I think it is. And they're sort of small communities where, let's say for PP and E&M, you'll have about 10 or 8 students for your subject in that particular college. And so you apply to the college, and that sort of means that that's your community, and that you have a localized system of education and teaching as well. And so you apply to one particular college, and you can look at the different colleges and see which one you'd like to apply for, and that's something you can look into more online as well. But those are kind of the rundown reasons for why I'd say Oxford is definitely, if you're willing to go through that level of intellectual intensity, is definitely something that you should be thinking about.
Cool. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. If anyone has a question, you can just unmute your microphone and say something, because we can't see everybody. So.
I'm happy to run through deadlines quickly. This is probably something that you might just actually want to screenshot or just take a second to write down a note of everything on here, because this is sort of the essential sort of things that you need to do and be aware of if you want to actually go through the process. So the first two things to be aware of are the UCAS early application deadline, which is the early deadline for submitting an application through UCAS, and you have to do this if you want to apply to Oxford. And you should be aware that you can add your other choices later, but if you're planning to apply to Oxford, 15th of October is set in stone. There's no getting around that, and by that time you need to have your personal statement reference and the submitting an application all sorted and ready to go. The other thing you need to do by the 15th of October is register for the TSA. For a lot of you, that might be done through speaking to somebody at your school or finding a testing centre elsewhere if your school aren't able to do that. So that's something to investigate. You can find it will sort of depend on what your school does or where testing centres near you are. Then once you've registered, the TSA itself is on the 3rd of November, so just over 3 months away, not a particularly long time to go. And this year that will be online again. Normally it's on paper, but last year and this year it's going to be online. And then depending on how well you do on that, you move on to invitations to interview, which will be sort of end of November, and then interviews which are going to be held online again in December. And after that whole long process, it's not until January next year that you'll actually find out your TSA score and whether you got an offer. Your TSA scores are released the day before your offers come out, so you don't find out your TSA score until after the interview process is over and done with. I think that sort of covers all of the key deadlines, but do feel free to ask if you have any specific questions there. Oh, and I should just add, do feel free to put in the chat if you don't want to unmute. If you don't get an interview, you can still find out your TSA score. They're all released the day before offers are made if you've got an interview. But it doesn't matter if you've got an interview or not. Everyone can find out their TSA scores.
I think it's especially important. I know a few people here are international students, so as in not sort of EEA based, as I am. It's really important that you literally now start looking for a test center, because during COVID, not only are the number of test centers significantly reduced, not every school is able to administer these tests. So those in the UK who take exams at their schools, you know, have a convenient test center at their school, but those who, you know, in the US might not have that access. I actually had to fly to a different state to take my exam. So depending on where you are, please look into that. Make sure you look into that early. Don't wait until the last minute. You're really going to regret it. So.
And I see we've got a question in the chat asking, does Oxford find out your TSA score before or after your interview offer? And this is sort of covered in this slide here. And the essential answer is yes, they definitely find out before they make interview offers, and it's essential. This is really what they look at when they're making you an offer for an interview. And if you do well in the TSA, you're basically guaranteeing yourself an interview. But if you do badly on the day, it can really, really hurt your chances. And I'll just run through this quickly. One of this is a chart taken from the admissions criteria sort of document, and this is the PPE, but this is the same for E&M. And wait, sorry, distracted by the right thing. But yeah, this essentially shows what they consider when awarding you an interview. And as you can see, pre-interview admissions test, which in this case is the TSA, is the number one thing that they sort of look at, and along with your sort of grades, obviously, but not as much you can do to affect that. And your personal statement, which you're probably worrying about and spending a lot of time trying to get right, is actually really not very important at all. And as you can see, is something that they rank as sort of low importance. So that's something to really bear in mind when you're thinking how you want to split your time for preparing for an application. Is your personal statement, while it's something that you can sort of feel you're making into a better version and doing drafts and redrafts, doing that for ages and ages and neglecting the TSA is going to really hurt your chances, because it's the TSA that will make all the difference when an admission tutor comes to look at your application.
Did you get asked during your interview about your personal statement?
I got asked one question, which I think was essentially just to check that I hadn't lied on it, but I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm a reapplicant. In my previous interview, I was not asked about it, and I wasn't asked about it again. So it's one of those things where, like, people put a lot of thought into their personal statement, and you absolutely should, right? You have one side of an A4 piece of paper to express yourself and to show your enthusiasm for a subject. So it is important, and you certainly shouldn't write like straight up trash or something. But when it comes to Oxford, just like Milo said, the TSA, we can't emphasize this enough, right? And also, I think one of the reasons why we're helping applicants with this is because there's just there's so little resources available for free to do the TSA. I actually went on this website called PPE Success the other day, and they were charging like £400 for TSA review. So I think that's a little bit silly. Our goal is to show that you can do the TSA through good studying. We want to open up this opportunity for as many people as possible, specifically and most especially for disadvantaged students. And I think the TSA should not be a barrier to entry. It instead should be an opportunity for you to show your aptitude for this subject, if that makes sense. So Theo, you want to do this one?
Sure, yeah. So last year Oxford were great.
Sorry, can I interrupt you very quickly just to go to a question that's just come in, which is just asking about management and how important that is for E&M in your personal statement, just while we're covering personal statements. It's sort of, I didn't actually include any management in my personal statement, and I think that sort of is pretty similar for a lot of other people who applied to E&M. It's something that, if you can get it in without it sort of distracting from the economics part, is obviously great and sort of shows that you're really keen. But they've Oxford are very clear that if you don't mention it, it doesn't affect your application, because they understand that most people will be applying to straight econ courses at other universities, and so it's not vital to get it in. Sorry, Theo, I'll let you continue.
No, and actually, I'll just add to that because I also applied for E&M, and I think, you know, if you want to, you can put in a small paragraph at the end about management, or if you have responsibilities in school, like you're a prefect or something, then it may be a nice link to talk about sort of your personal management and then how that, so you can show off that you're a prefect, and other universities want to know that. But with Oxford, you can also make the link to management with that. And if you want to mention a book as well, sure, put that in your personal statement, but I wouldn't make it a major focus, because while you want to go to Oxford, Oxford is probably only one of your 5 choices. So don't jeopardize, you know, your application with other universities by making it a 50-50 economics and management split.
And
So Theo
sorry.
actually, Theo actually runs an account on Instagram called Oxbridging the Gap, and he's currently compiling a lot of personal statements to help students who need help on their personal statement. I just want to say, I think we should move this along. We will, in a future workshop, discuss personal statements, and we're happy to talk about that sort of at the end of the workshop. But yeah, like just due to time constraints, I think we should move the TSA portion along.
Yeah, sure. But I definitely check out that Instagram account. Joe is doing great work over there.
It's on the last slide. We have your Instagram account. I'll put it in the chat now.
Yeah, it's not. It's Joe's Instagram account. It's not mine.
Oh, my bad. Sorry. Okay, cool.
Okay, so I'll get on with the data.
Yeah.
So last year, as I was saying, Oxford people FOI'd the E&M admissions data, and Oxford released it all in an Excel spreadsheet. And my family and I did some analysis of this last year to find out what was really important in the admissions process. Because, you know, Oxford say that the TSA is really important, but we wanted to find out, is that actually the case? And long story short, it was the single most important factor for getting an interview. Everything else was basically negligible. They really only cared about that. Other things that would help you are if you have a high contextual GCSE score, so your GCSEs are much higher than the average for your school, you know, that may also help you and mean you don't need to score as highly in the TSA. But for most people, it's the single most important factor. And so there's an interesting diagram at the site which compares the average TSA 1 score. So that's the first multiple choice section. Last year, we had to sit also the essay section for TSA, but you don't have to for this year. And the graph splits up the TSA scores for applicants overall to each college, then to the interview holders and the offer holders. And in each case, the offer holders scored more highly on average than interview holders more sort of generally. But actually, the TSA isn't that important beyond the interview stage. It's more that there's just correlation that the people who got offers also performed best on the TSA. So once you get to the interview stage, even if you feel like you've completely aced the TSA, after the interview stage, the most important thing is how you score on the interviews. And your interviews are actually ranked, you're scored on your interviews out of 10 by each college. So they're comparing all of the applicants and they quantify that. So that's really important post-interview. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Yo-Yo.
Yeah, so just like Theo said, after interview, it's not as important, but it still is important because, so for E&M, they score your interview out of 10 points. For PPE, they score it out of 100 points, sort of on the British marking scale, 70 for an excellent interview, 60 for subpar, et cetera, et cetera. And when a college has filled up all of its sort of first round spots, and they're offering second interviews to fill the remaining spots, they use a weighted equation that includes your TSA 1 score, your TSA 2 essay score. Again, this is for PPEs, and then they multiply in your interview scores. So it doesn't hurt to have a very strong and robust TSA score. It really will help you compensate for a sort of average or slightly weaker interview performance. Not everyone's the best at interviews, even though they may be really good at their subject. So I think, you know, it's just really, really important that you do well on your TSA. if you look at the statistics in terms of the number of offers made, every single year it gets more and more competitive, right? And that's just because there's the same number of places and the applications keep increasing. Don't be mistaken by just the raw percentage. You have to remember what's the grades required for E&M?
A-star AA.
Right. I think PPE is AAA. But you know, this is arguably, and I'm fairly certain, more selective than a general program at Harvard or Stanford. This is very, very competitive, and you want to do anything you can, especially because this is an academic selection process rather than one that focuses on your extracurriculars or how holistic you are as a person. It's just very much about how you can perform on this test, what your grades show, and you know, how well you can present yourself in interview. So sorry, move on. Okay, cool. Okay, we're going to go over the homework questions real quick, and then we're going to break out into two groups. Critical thinking. So there are two types of questions. There are two main categories of questions on the TSA. On every exam, there's 50 questions. 25 of them are critical thinking. Those are the ready questions, right? The ones where you have to read something and well, there's some pretty long problem-solving questions too, but on the critical thinking, it's literally read a passage and answer a question, right? Problem-solving is the mathy ones, the ones involving spatial reasoning, so the ones with dice, with die, with cubes, with, you know, nets, things like that. Those are all problem-solving. Critical thinking is cool because there are 7 very distinct types of questions. And as you can see, I put the number of the problem number of each type of question on the 2008 past paper here. Once you get good at this, you can instantly recognize a strategy for each one of these subcategories of critical thinking, and you'll be able to approach it in such a quick way. So it's really important that you understand the subcategories. We will go over 3 of them today. We'll go over the other 4 at a future workshop. But this is why I said it's not for those of you who contacted me by email asking if you should just do every single paper from every single year, every past paper. That's not necessarily the right thing to do. You really want to understand the structure of the paper. And if you're not understanding sort of the maniacal minds of the TSA authors, you're not properly understanding the exam. So yeah, okay. Does anyone have anything to add to that? Okay, so yeah, Adam and Catherine are going to lead the identify the main conclusion. That's going to be the 5 questions that are listed there, plus the 1 question from the homework, so 6 questions. And then Janey and Jonah are going to lead the other breakout group, which is 4 questions, and I think it's 2 questions from the homework. So I think it's also 6 questions. So yeah, okay. Does anyone want to, let's start on the homework. So would everyone get the homework out, please? And we'll start with the first question, which was question 50 from TSA Oxford 2015. So does anyone want to start this one? Okay, let's pick on someone from the chat then, okay. Let's see, Leona, would you please take this question?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if my answer is correct, but I chose C.
Okay, can you explain your reasoning, please?
Yeah, so basically I divide this entire pattern into 4 parts. Would you mind if I share my screen?
Please, please.
Thank you. Sorry, it might take a while. Oh, I cannot share my screen.
I can give you permission.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Who am I giving permission to, sir?
Leona.
Yeah. Okay, should be able to share now.
Thank you. Yes.
Cool.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So basically, I divide this entire field into 4 parts. I'm not confident at all about this problem, but this is how I solve it. So I feel like this part and this part are essentially the same, but like this angle and this angle are different because I kind of just do it like I'm not doing it logically. I just kind of feel like, okay, this is how I'm gonna do it. So I feel like this pattern are different, and this pattern are the same, and this one are also different because the way you look at it from this angle, I feel like 4 is like here, and then we have 1, and because they cannot be on the same line, so it should be 3 over here, and then 2. Yeah, sorry, I'm not confident with my result.
No, you are you're on the right track. You've got the right method. The answer is not correct, but you have the right you have the exact way of thinking. Yes. So maybe I'll just go over this question on my iPad real quick.
Thank you.
Let me.
Sorry for that.
No. Thank you for sharing. I like this is important. Again, there's no judgment here. This is maybe some people's first time doing the TSA. So trust me, once you understand the TSA, none of this will be intimidating, and it's okay to get questions wrong. Okay. So the question is asking 4 trees stand at the corners of square field X. They're photographed from Y and close up from a distance, but never so that one tree stands in front of another. So what Leona was saying was sort of if you stand, let's see here, if you stand right here, so if you stand at the corner and you can actually kind of rotate your paper or your screen. If you're standing at this corner and you're looking in this direction, then the order of the trees would be 4, 3, 1, 2, right? So you're seeing this tree first, then this tree, then this tree, then this tree. So that's sort of the first view. The second view would be if you stood sort of right here, right? If you stood right here and you look this way, the trees would appear as 4, 1, 3, 2, right? So that's the other order. And for these two, if you can view it from sort of the top left corner and the center left of the field Y, then you could logically assume that you could view it from the same 2 positions here. And then you'd get 1, 4, 2, 3. And you'd also get, let's see, you'd also get 1, 2, 4, 3, right? So 1, 2, 4, 3, right? And then, so we know the answer is not A, B, or C. And I think it's E, because if you photograph it from right here, then the order that appears to you is going to be 1, 4, 3, 2, right? So 1, 4, 3, 2. So there's going to be five possibilities, and the answer is E. So does that make sense for everybody? Is there any questions about that?
May I ask a question, Leo?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just feel like the thing I find about for TSA is like once I know how can do this problem, I still have trouble doing other similar problems. So if there are ways to kind of like solve this issue, like if there is a general strategy to approach those problems, because I feel like the problem solving ones, like I'm good with clear thinking, but I feel like problem solving ones are like they're really different. There are a lot of varieties.
There are a lot of varieties, and they actually don't even properly categorize them. They use such top level categories. So I think this one is called identify methods. So this is where you have, this is where you have to create your own method to solve it, whether that's drawing. A lot of TSA requires, I think this is actually spatial reasoning, because you're working in a 2-dimensional space, and it asks you to just envision the question in your head. I got to be honest, I don't have any tips on how to solve these better. I think my advice is to draw. This is probably not going to appear on this year's exam. For the online test, they removed a lot of the spatial reasoning stuff, because for spatial reasoning, they know that you really have to have a hard copy of the test and write on your paper and things like that. That's why I didn't even want to go over question 8 on the homework, because question 8 is something that you really should be marking on your paper. Honestly, I think kind of hang in there. These things get easier, and we will do more review of the spatial reasoning questions. It will make a lot more sense. Don't panic that you don't have this particular question correct.
Is it okay if I jump in here?
Please, yes.
Yeah, that's all right, obviously. Just wanted to add on as well that the way they score the TSA is you get kind of a different amount for each question depending on how well other people did on it. So if it's like an easy question, you get kind of fewer points than you would if it was a really difficult question. And usually every year there are a couple of questions that very few people get. And I think usually the spatial reasoning ones people do quite badly on. So over time, when you practice it, you do kind of pick up methods for different types of questions. But if it's one of those things where you're like, I can just never get this question right, you can afford to miss, 1 or 2 questions of paper. And if it's a harder question, it'll have it won't be as big a deal if you miss it. So just don't get too worried about it if there's one kind of thing that you feel like you're never going to get, because it does improve practice. And even if it doesn't, there's a little bit of an error margin there.
Yeah. So in other words, don't worry if you don't have one particular type of question down. It's not gonna kill your performance. Okay. So does anyone else have questions about this one? I think this is one of those where there's only one right answer, not really subject to interpretation. So perhaps we'll go back to the slideshow and do the next one. Let's see. Oops, let's see. Okay. Can someone do this word problem, please? Maybe Luke M.
I'm not gonna lie, this question got me completely. I had no idea where to even start.
Okay.
I can do this one if someone wants. I think I know how to do it quite well.
Please go over it. Thank you.
So in the end, I think it's more of a mathsy one. It's more of a problem solving one. I'm not sure if it's classed as critical thinking, but it's quite simple in the end. I think if you write the time zones all in terms of T, where T is the time in London. So if you write it in a list, you get April lives in New York, where the time is 5 hours behind London, i.e. April time equals T minus 5. And then obviously as you go through, May is 8 hours behind London, so T minus 8, and June is Tokyo, T plus 9. And then the last bit, I had to read it through a couple of times to actually get your head around it. But when you look, it's how much later at the end, so it's comparative. So realistically, the fact that it's 11:30 makes no difference, and it's a bit of a distractor because the numbers around there and times get a bit tricky. So when you go back to it, you just need to work out is how much later is it going to be, given that it went to whoever, where it's meant to go to June, except it went to April. So all you're looking for in the end is the difference between April's time and June's time. So T plus 9 minus T minus 5. So 9 plus 5, which is 14 hours. So C. Or is it? Yeah.
Bravo.
Wait, I've written down D, but I'm not sure why. But yeah, I'm fairly sure that's the right method.
That's exactly, that's the perfect explanation. And I think you've explained it better than any of us could have. That is the correct answer. And this is a problem solving, by the way. Anything that's not strictly reading based is problem solving. So yes, in this case, we were just looking for the difference between April and June. I had to read the second paragraph so many times doing this one, because at first what I was doing was I was figuring out like what time she would have received it. I was working backwards from 11:30 p.m. But if you really read the question, just like Elizabeth said, it's really asking you between the difference of time between the time that the message has been sent to the incorrect person to the time of the person who actually received it, which in this case is the time difference between April and June. So does anyone have any questions about this one? Okay, cool. Let's do the next one. Which one's the next one? Let's see. Oh boy, all right. Does anyone from the chat want to volunteer for this one?
Can I do this one?
Let's see if there's anyone else. I just want to encourage participation, but if there's no one else, we can have you do it.
I can try.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tina.
So I quite literally like trialed and errored this one, so it took me a little longer than I probably would have liked. But like the strategy I ultimately came up with was to list out like all the possible times that it could have occurred at. So I eliminated for like visit the museum, I eliminated the 11 a.m. option because I get there later than it starts. So I can only go to the museum at 2 p.m. The maze, I left it as is. I didn't want to go through all that effort of listing it all out. And then taking the guided tour, I worked out that the only option I would have was to go at 1 p.m. since at 3 p.m. it would end at 4:20 and it'd be after the time I'd need to leave. So I don't have access to it. So if someone could like cross those two off, that'd be great. Yeah, so then I worked out, you know, all the other things. I have like a range of time. I have like a range of time to do stuff. So I worked out that the one that would be eliminated, the one that I would have to miss out would be between the guided tour and the museum, since the time constraints overlap a little. So like I had crossed out those answers: visit the maze, have lunch in the park, or walk in the grounds, since I knew I could work around and like squeeze those into the schedule. And then I put, just to say like outright the answer, I put C, and I think the reason why I didn't like, in the end, I didn't actually come up with like a schedule, like a final schedule that would explain why. I think I chose C mainly because I figured like using my kind of knowledge with like how test makers make exams, I figured there's a higher probability that I could fit something that takes 55 minutes than something that takes 80 minutes. That was kind of me just hinging a guess, but if like one of you guys has like a better explanation as to why.
It's the correct guess. And you know, I sometimes say it doesn't matter how you get to the answer. You know, as long as you get the oranges up the hill, you're there. You know?
Because I figured like once I got it down to 2, it was like a 50-50. And like one of the things I've noticed with like problem solving examples in general is like they'll try to throw in answers that will take you a longer time to figure out the correct answer, like to kind of waste your time. So I figured it'd be better if I just guessed.
The whole TSA is a waste of time, but yes. But you like that strategy is actually one of the strategies we'll talk about later, which is when you really don't know the answer, you want to narrow down as many things as possible, because on the TSA, there's no penalty for guessing. And when you're out of time and you're sort of flipping back in your paper or going back through the computer screen and you saw, you know, I got 30 seconds left, I've got 2 answers, I've sort of been able to logically and reasonably deduct the possible answers. A 50-50 shot is better than a 1 in 5 shot. So that's definitely a viable strategy.
Can I chip in as well, just very quickly?
Please.
The other thing I was going to say as well is that sometimes it can feel like trial and error is, oh, I shouldn't be doing the question this way. I should be able to smartly work out the principle they're trying to get at. But trial and error can actually, if you can do it quickly, can actually be, it was one of the ways I worked out a lot of the questions in the TSA, because because sometimes trying to work out the principle is like very complicated, and actually if you can just very quickly scribble down all the possibilities. Like I agree with Yo-Yo as well, is saying that basically what you did, if you can first eliminate what definitely is not the case, then trial and error the other answers out. And if you can do that quickly, then you'll actually find that you can get quite a few questions right quickly that way. If you've eliminated the definite no's, then trial and error the yeses, and actually that can get you quite a few marks, I think.
I didn't even think about the fact that the guided tour and the museum were mutually exclusive. I sketched it out and I sort of did what Jonah said, which was like, now I know a better way of solving it. But when this was the last thing I left blank on the test, I think, and it was definitely challenging. You know, I think what I did was I just literally plugged and chugged. I did like at least 7 or 8 different combinations. It was a mess. But I think Tina, like what you would benefit from is, and everybody, quite frankly, is sketching out your thoughts, right? Make sure you write it down. And that's a really important part of the TSA, like make your thinking and writing really clear. Let me do this on the iPad just real quick. Let's see here. Cool. So for this one, I think what I ended up finding out was, so what Tina said was the bus doesn't arrive until 11:30. So we can't do the first session of the museum. We have to leave by 4:15. So we can't do the 3 p.m. guided tour. So if you just sort of sketch out the day between 11 o'clock and slightly past 16 o'clock. So 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So this is the time. Okay, so we have to leave by 16:15, and then we get there at 11:30. So there we go. And then the museum starts at 2 p.m. for about 55 minutes. So that's here. This is the museum. Let's see, we can take the guided tour at 1 p.m., which is 80 minutes. All right, that's the guided tour. We can walk in the grounds at any time for 75 minutes. We can have lunch in the cafe between 12:30 and 2 p.m. So we can have, let me put this in a different color, 12:30 and 2 p.m. So we can have lunch anytime. We can start lunch anytime between 12:30 and 2. That's the start time. So we can actually run that into 2:25. So that's here. So this is lunch. And yeah, I think once you sketch that out, you realize that you can do the maze at the beginning, somewhere around this time here. You can do the walk in the grounds sort of towards the end. And then as Tina was saying, the museum and the guided tour conflict here. So you choose the one that you have the most time for, which is the museum, the shorter activity, and then lunch goes between the start of the museum and the end of your what is it? The end of the visit to the maze. This is hard to explain, but yeah, what I mean is just sketch it out graphically. Sorry, that was a really bad explanation, but just sketch it out and organize your thoughts on paper. So yeah, for me, I understand what this scribble means. Maybe not everyone does, but that's how I got to the answer. So cool. Let's go back to the slideshow. Okay. Can someone do this one, please?
I think I can try this one,
Please.
but I'm not sure if it's like correct.
Don't worry. Let's do it.
So we have 2 places, which are, I label it as M and I, so the mainland and the island. So for the mainland, ferries leave at 9:05, 9:25, 9:45. And then for the next hour, it's like 10:05, 10:25, and 10:45. And then for I wrote it as 9:15, 9:35, 9:55, 10:15, 10:35, 10:55. And then, so if we have a boat, if we have a boat that leaves at 9:05, the journey takes 40 minutes and it has to stay there for 5 minutes. So it spends a total of 45 minutes. So it gets to the island and by the next time it can leave would be 9:55. So we know that the time slot for 9:55, we can cross that out. And then we'd need a second boat to come back at 9:15 because the boat at 9:05 can't get there in time. Same with the 9:35. So now we have 3 boats. And so that means since those 2 boats get back by 10:05 and 10:25, that means that the second boat, the second time slot at 9:25, there would have to be another boat there. So now we have 4 boats. That boat gets to the place at 10:15, and then we need a third boat for the 9:45 to get to 10:35. So we need 5 boats in total. See, I'm not sure if it's correct.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think. Sorry, I don't have the answer marked down here, but you're right. So
yeah, it is 5 boats. I've got the answers here.
Okay, great.
Quite long though.
So yeah, you're correct. Your explanation was perfect. It takes 45 minutes to make a single trip. This type of question is really common. I've seen this on a lot of past papers where sort of it's like if boats or things are running between 2 destinations and it takes a certain amount of time, how many total assets do you need? And in this case, it's pretty simple. If you leave the mainland at 9:05 and it takes 45 minutes, then this boat here is going to arrive at 9:50. If that arrives at 9:50, then it can be used for the 9:55 island scheduled boat that's going to come back to the mainland. So we don't need a separate boat for this journey here. But the boats before that, there's no boats from the mainland. So you need 2 like new boats for that journey basically. And the first boat from the island is going to arrive to the mainland at 10 o'clock. So anything before 10 o'clock on the mainland needs to be a boat, a unique boat. So that's why there's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You need 5 boats because once you get to 10:05, you can use this boat here. So you don't need a new boat for this service here. But for anything before that, you need a fresh boat. And like I said, on the island side, because the first ferry from the mainland arrives before the 3rd service, you only need 2 new boats. Sorry. You only need 2 new boats. So the answer is 5 boats. Does that make sense? Does anyone have questions? Please speak up if you have questions. Cool. Okay. Let's. We're not going to go over the last question, the one with the ornithologists. If you do have questions about that, we can talk about it later. But let's get into the breakout rooms. To be honest, I have no idea how those work. So Theo, perhaps you could help split us up and ensure that Adam and Catherine are in one of them, and Jonah and Janey are in the other.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not great at breakout rooms either. Okay.
Oh boy. All right.
So it was Jamie and Catherine in one.
Yes.
Oh, it's Adam and Catherine.
Adam and Catherine, got it.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, my bad. Yeah.
Okay.
Is the group to be split into 2 then, and then there's a switch over afterwards, or
Yeah.
is that a plan?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
I think the groups can stay the same, but then the host can switch, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that would be easier. So we'll come into the various rooms to talk about specific types of questions.
Do you want to give us a time limit, or do you want us to message you?
Let's just message on WhatsApp.
Right, that's fine.
Yeah.
Just put it on there when you're
Bye-bye.
coming to the end, and then we can work out, yeah, time to switch.
Have you figured out the?
It's coming, don't worry.
Okay. I mean, tell me how to do it, because I don't even know, like, just for future reference, how do you do it?
Okay, I just click breakout rooms, then I'm doing it manually so that I get the right people in the right rooms for the hosts.
I think it's only the actual host, not co-hosts, who can do it.
Okay.
Oh, right. Okay.
All right. Okay, that should be going now.
Okay, cheers. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, let's go. Scary ass voice. Milo, do you want to jump into the other one?
I think Theo's in there, but
okay, that's fine.
I don't mind. I can try.
No. You and I are good here. So yeah, let's.
Adam and Catherine.
Yeah, take it away, guys.
So I'm just trying to see if I can share my screen.
Is this the main conclusion group, or is this the?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is okay. Identify the main conclusion.
Got it.
Okay, is this working now?
Yes.
Okay, so with identifying the main conclusion, I think the main piece of advice I would give is, obviously, before you read the whole paragraph, I think you should read the little question, this question here, to make sure you understand which kind of critical thinking question it is. So once you've seen that it says main conclusion, you should then read over the paragraph. Generally, there'll be one sentence which you can identify is the correct answer for the main conclusion. In this case, it's the first sentence. But as it says in this document, the conclusion, it could be anywhere within this paragraph. So don't think that it's just going to be at the end or at the beginning. You've got to basically look at what each sentence is telling you and figure out that they're all leading to this, to one point, which is the main conclusion, right? So, Catherine, do you want to go through one of these questions?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to just go through the document? I've done questions like 2, 4, and 6. I haven't done 1.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'll take the first question then. Right. So, conspicuous consumption. So first things first, main conclusion.
Adam, could you make the text bigger, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Is this readable?
Yeah.
Okay. So also you should probably, the way I do it is I read through the entire paragraph and then I'll read these options, but you'll obviously want to develop your own style of doing this. So it may be easier for you to read through the options first and then try and go back through and see which lines up best. So on this question, D is the correct conclusion. To be really happy, we should behave more like our ancestors did. If you read through this entire paragraph, basically all of the points, every sentence is going to end up pointing you one way or another. And some of these options might be red herrings. So for example, even though the first point A is stated in the paragraph, that doesn't make it the main conclusion. So it's just one of the points that ends up leading you in the end to your main conclusion. B, we need to decide what is really important in our lives. That's not stated in the conclusion, in the paragraph at all. And C, that's also one of the assumptions of the question that ends up leading you to the conclusion. D is the conclusion, whereas E is, again, one of the points that ends up leading you to state that to be really happy, we should behave more like our ancestors did.
So, sorry if I could jump in real quick.
Sure.
The main conclusion, I didn't even know this when I was taking the exam. The main conclusion is always in the passage. It doesn't require you to come up with any new concepts or to like derive anything. It's in the actual passage. So that's why B wasn't it. B is not put in, it didn't say anything about B in the passage. So it can't be anything that's not in the passage. Also, just like Adam just said, everything points to the correct answer with the main conclusion questions, right? Like A is supporting D. sending out signals to impress others is a waste of time. So therefore, D, to be really happy, we should behave more like your ancestors did. And the whole passage is, everything supports the answer. So if you're reading something else and you're like, wait a second, that sounds like it's supporting another one of the answers, then the one that's supporting can't be the right answer because it's not the main conclusion. So
yeah, and if you've got a conclusion, if you've got an answer you think is the conclusion and that you see that it leads to something else, then best guess that's not the correct answer. Okay, Catherine, do you want to do the next one?
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions about that one? Can everyone like turn on their video? Cool, awesome. Okay, yeah.
Oh, faces. Okay, cool.
Okay,
so I was gonna talk a little bit about kind of high-level strategies I generally use for identify the conclusion questions, and then I was going to talk about the specific answers. Hopefully that's helpful. If you have any questions at any point, just like unmute yourself and interrupt me. That's fine. Yeah, I know everyone talked about this before, but basically the point in the question, or a really easy way to do the question, is just distinguishing between premises in an argument and like the conclusion of the argument. So, with the premises in an argument, basically, if it's a premise, if you remove it, it would either weaken the conclusion or the conclusion just wouldn't logically follow anymore. So if there's a sentence in the question and you took it out and then the conclusion wouldn't make sense, or like the rest of it wouldn't make sense, then it's a premise. Or if you took it out and it makes the whole argument like a lot less convincing, it's the premise. And the conclusion is normally just what follows from the argument. I mean, I know that sounds kind of obvious, but another good thing to think about is the scope. So like some of the options here, they kind of seem like they might be the right answer because the text does mention them. But generally speaking, the conclusion, like more of the text will focus specifically on that point. So like for this one, let's talk about this question. The answer A, having a relatively low income is not the same as being poor. Like that's in the text, right? Like some parts of the text are talking about that. So if you look at the overall kind of scope of the statement, it's not just about like relatively low income, it's more generally about poverty and average income. So you can discard it as the answer. So yeah, for this one, another thing I did is you can look at the like structure words, I guess, like, oh my God, yeah, sorry. I'll summarize it and I'll put it in the chat, yeah. Okay, for this question, one thing I did was I looked at like kind of the structure words. So there's stuff like, I mean, it sounds really obvious, like so, therefore, thus, this, that kind of thing. You're just looking for markers that kind of help you figure out where the argument's going. So we've got, you start off with an opening statement. Sometimes poverty is defined in relation to average income. And then we go for, just kind of rebutting that. It's not legitimate. This is obvious if we consider the consequences. It talks about this. And then you have, on the other hand, basically you can see how it flows if you look at these kind of really boring structural words. Probably not the best question to point that on, but I guess that would be my advice. So the answer to that one was C, right? Because the whole text is basically saying, we define it in relation to average income. It talks about like what that might entail. Then it says that's terrible. It gives an example of why that doesn't work. And then it gives another example of why it's also like flawed. So you can see the whole kind of argument is moving towards this idea that this measurement doesn't work.
So that's actually a really good point. I think in one of the past papers, there was literally a passage where it said, in conclusion, and then they concluded something, okay? Like,
yeah.
Just think about how you would write. Well, actually, don't do that, because think about how a good author would write. There are a lot of those words. And if you have a good grasp of sort of sentence structure, Catherine's exactly right. You can use that to help you infer what the passage is trying to conclude. So,
but just because you're looking at the structure of the paragraph, don't fall into thinking that it's going to be point, evidence, explanation, and then the conclusion at the end, because it's a pattern in these that they tend to put the conclusion at the start and then give you evidence afterwards, or put the conclusion somewhere else in the paragraph to be misleading. So,
does anyone have any questions about past paper question 1? No? Okay. Aisha? No? Okay.
Okay. So third question is about cannabis. Do you think we should ask people to give their answers, or should we just go through and say with the answer?
Ideally, we should have Ella explain it to us. So
Okay.
Please.
Wait, question 11.
Please.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, I got that one correct. There's much evidence to suggest that Kurt. It was just basically all saying the reasons why it should be prescribed, and kind of about like the therapeutic uses for people suffering from conditions. And then it says, if doctors were legally allowed to prescribe cannabis, multiple sclerosis sufferers and others might be spared much pain. So all of it kind of just suggests that it should be legalized, and then that's why I went for D. Yeah.
I don't think there's much to add to that point, really.
Perfect.
Good. Okay.
Can we explain why it's not B real quick?
Yeah. So, well, B is, if you read the paragraph, where does it say? If doctors were legally allowed to prescribe cannabis, multiple sclerosis sufferers and others might be spared much pain. This is, if you think about it, it's quite obviously one of the reasons why the conclusion is that it should be legal for doctors to prescribe cannabis. And you can see that D follows from B, whereas B does not follow from D. So therefore D must be the conclusion. And as regards A, C, and E, none of those are actually stated in the paragraph, I believe. So it can't be any of them.
Well, E is mentioned, so you have to be careful. E is one of those red herring ones, because it does mention that it says if cannabis could be legally prescribed, it would be possible to conduct these large-scale surveys. And then it says large-scale surveys are needed to establish. So it says it's needed. The passage doesn't say anything about needing. It says it's possible. So even if that were the conclusion, it can't be the right answer, because it's not contained within the actual passage. Remember, stay within the passage. Don't go out of it. So.
And yeah, and watch the specific words, like Yo-Yo just said. Where it says needed, that should point to that's basically changes the entire meaning of the sentence. So that point isn't really within the paragraph. So you can be certain that that's not the conclusion you draw from it. Okay. Any questions on that one? Catherine, do you want to say this one?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I'll just read it again. I have answered it, but I think it's helpful to do it like quickly in time. Actually, wait, does someone on the call want to suggest what they think the main conclusion is, and then talk us through how they got to that? And then, I can just jump in and go from there.
Call on someone. Yeah, just get them.
Be brave. Yeah, awesome. Go for it.
So I got this one right. It's C. And I put C because it's kind of like, well, it is the last sentence of the passage, but it does kind of feel like a concluding sentence. And beforehand, they're talking a lot about the bad consequences of food production and stuff. So yeah, I think the fact that it's kind of one of the final sentences and he's been talking about the negative repercussions is quite indicative, which is why I put C. So I don't know if that's a good explanation.
No, right, yeah. No, that's great. That's a good strategy, I think. Like, you've identified the structure of the argument broadly. So if we kind of look at it like in a kind of really zoomed out perspective, at the start, he's kind of setting up this kind of context, some stuff about food fluctuating and how the market normally works. Then we hit, but now we are changing the environment adversely. They will not only be permanent, but will have. So you can see they're kind of providing two arguments in favor of, their conclusion that this time things are different. And then right at the end, we've got, so it is now. But exactly. What just happened in the chat, so it is really shows you that what happened, what was previously in the text is building towards that point, that everything follows, everything was leading up to that final sentence. So if you kind of look at it from that perspective, you can see that like the main argument the passage is making is that we need some kind of planned response, which is obviously C.
and going off what Catherine said earlier, look at the words, right? There's but, right? But now we are changing the environment irreversibly. So that discredits almost everything that was just said, or tries to counter what was just said. And then there's the word so, right? So that's leading us to something. So those are all words we can look out for.
Also, I just wanted to add, first two sentences are basically saying what it says in E, but the paragraph is more just stating that point, and it's not really used in the argument. And then from what we have with the rest, they make a few points which actually do lead to a conclusion. So even though you could draw from this paragraph E, that doesn't make it the conclusion, because they've just stated E. They haven't actually made an argument in favor of E, whereas they have made an argument in favor of C.
Yeah, exactly.
Did anyone get something other than C that we can maybe talk this through? It's okay to get the wrong answer. We can talk about it.
I was debating between B and C. I put C in the end, but I was quite close to putting B.
Yeah, so I guess I can talk about the difference between B and C. So it's it's another one of those, I guess, red herring ones, because I think like B isn't wrong, but the argument like in the text is like stronger than that, I think, right? So if we look, so this is particularly, I think, in the final sentence, from the structure of the overall like passage, you can kind of see it's building towards this final sentence. So it is now vital to seek some sort of planned response. And that is a stronger argument than B. Does that make sense? So B is almost like, if you cut some parts of the passage, you could get B, because the passage does say that market forces cannot prevent global famine. It doesn't just say that, it goes beyond that. It argues that, you know, because of this, we need a planned response. So yeah, B is in the passage, but the overall conclusion is a stronger one than B. It is that we need a planned response.
Yeah, because if the conclusion were just B, then you could interpret the paragraph to be saying there's no solution to global famine. And yeah. So the fact that it offers an alternative solution should lead you to the final conclusion.
B, what Emma just said in the chat, B is very much a premise, right? Because literally right after, like, why do we, again, like, which one leads to the other? That's what I keep thinking. And also the passage first mentions that market forces alone will be unable to prevent a global famine. So it is now vital to seek some sort of planned response. It just follows, one comes right after the other. I think in this case, one is setting you up to conclude the other. If you just take literally those two sentences out and isolate them, you'll realize that it is C. But it's really good that you were able to narrow it down to just B and C. Like I said, even if you weren't sure, it helps so much to, like I've done that where I do the exam and I skip a few questions, but I've narrowed it down. And then at the end, I come back to it. And then I have a better clarity of mind at that point. And then I'm just like, oh, wow, obviously it's C, so you keep narrowing it down. That's a really good strategy.
Okay, should we move on?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so question 35. Okay, so does someone want to give their answer to this one before we go into it?
We perhaps...
do you want to pick someone?
Yeah, Emma, please.
The chat.
Yeah, Emma, please. Thank you.
So with this one, it seems to, I think the conclusion's kind of near the start, and then it kind of backs it up afterwards. So I put A. The whole argument is basically that it wasn't unfair that the leading judge and the rest of the paragraph sort of that and the opinion of why. So I think the premises kind of come afterwards.
And it's also important to see the distinction that at the start he says, the writer says, that's how some commentators view the failed attempt. So they're laying out a possible view of this situation. They could go on to then counter argue that, but if we carry on reading, we see that all of the arguments that are then given are in favor of the initial statement that is made. So correct.
That is an interesting thing. I'm learning something new as well. A lot of these statements are actually written, a lot of these passages are actually written like that. They give you one view of the conclusion, they give you the opposite view of the conclusion, right? They say critics will say, others will say, some will say, something like that. And that really leads you to like sort of the main conclusion of the argument. So look for things like opposite opinions, look for things like controversial takes. Those probably lead you to the main conclusion.
Okay, any questions on this one?
Did anyone get something other than A? Okay.
Okay. Next question then. Catherine, you want to take this?
Yeah, same thing again. If anyone wants to jump in and explain what they got and why they thought that, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It's just interesting to hear how people approach them.
Can we get Aisha Q, please?
Hi, yeah. Is that 45?
Yeah.
I can't remember if I wrote A or C, but I think the correct answer was C.
Okay.
And just because I like crossed it out and then it looks weird on what I wrote, so I can't really tell what I wrote now. But so it says, so C is that injuries on the carcasses of farm animals cannot have been caused by domestic cats. So in the passage, it obviously talks about how so it says the nature of injuries indicates that a large predator must have been responsible. And then it goes, so it kind of states it there, I guess, but then it goes on to say that sorry, one sec. Yeah, so then it goes on to say that it could have been domestic cats, but then, and it kind of sidetracks into saying that it could have been domestic cats, but I think the main conclusion here is that it's saying that it's talking about the injuries on the animals. So as a result, it's saying that the injuries cannot have been caused by a small animal such as a domestic cat, and it has to be a large animal like a puma. And I think that's where I got my conclusion from, by focusing on the fact that it was asking about like the injuries rather than anything else.
Yeah, right. So I think your reasoning here is good. I think that's a good strategy to take, and like generally it's correct. The answer was actually A. I mean, I can talk a little bit about how you kind of get to A, but I think C and A are similar. It's almost like with the other question where like one of the options is, you know, the passage makes a conclusion, and one of the options is like a slightly weaker version of that conclusion. So I'm just going to go through the passage a little bit and just talk about like what it's arguing, and then we can kind of talk about what the options are. So
I think I changed it to A. It's just because I wrote C and then A on top of it. I just couldn't tell which one it was. But yeah, A is the correct answer. Sorry, yeah.
No, it's fine.
A is the correct answer.
They're very close, and your reasoning was correct. It's more interesting to hear about like how you approached it than the answer, really.
It's easy when you know the answer to like then employ confirmation bias and be like, of course it's A, you know. But yeah, we'll talk it through. You had really good reasoning. I actually at first chose C on this one as well. So this one was, I actually wrote 2 question marks on this one because I thought this one was probably the most challenging of all the questions on the 2008 past paper for main conclusion. So anyways.
Yeah, so this one has quite an interesting structure. And I think a lot of the stuff, like it's not irrelevant, but you don't actually, like a lot of the stuff in the passage isn't necessarily like, you don't need it to find the conclusion. So right at the start, we have this thing. So the first sentence, it sets up the fact that animals have been killed. And then it sets up the fact that the injuries indicates a large predator. Then it talks about how local people saw big cats, but then investigators dismissed these claims. However, it says, however, even if you get rid of the claims, you can't explain the injuries on the carcasses by talking about small cats. Therefore, big cats must be responsible. So really what it's done here is right at the start is it's set up the kind of 2 options, right? It said, we've got injuries. It could be small cats. It could be big cats. And it says the way the injuries look is that means that it can't be small cats. So all the stuff about the people like, you know, seeing big cats and the people like being doubted by investigations isn't really like affecting that argument, because the argument is just says we've got small cats or it's big cats. We know it can't be small cats, therefore it must be big cats. if that makes sense. Another way you could just pick up on that, if that's not really how you like approaching it, is again, you can kind of think about the structure of it, like how it flows. So most of the start of the passage is kind of just setting it up, talking about investigations and stuff. And then we get to kind of the main argument, I guess, which is saying, but these investigations, have failed to deal with a point that blah, 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 blah. So the but there shows you that whilst it's set up a possibility in the start, he doesn't agree with that. Like that's not the conclusion it's drawing. So from there, you can kind of figure out that the final point is like big cats must be responsible. So, and why it's C and not A is really just, again, that last sentence, which the whole passage really builds up to. It's not just that it isn't small cats, is what it says right at the end. Big cats must be responsible. So C is kind of like it's in the passage, and it's kind of like a weaker claim. It says that, it can't be domestic cats, but the passage goes beyond arguing for that. It like states that it must have been by big cats. So that's how you can get between C and A. And again, with the other options, like B about the sightings, that is in the text, but it's not the main conclusion because nothing else is really supporting it. It's just used to support the conclusion. E isn't even in the text, so you can rule that one off straight away because if it's not in the text, it's not the main conclusion. Like you could infer that, but it's definitely not a conclusion. And D also isn't in the text. So to be fair, even if you find it really confusing, and I think this is a tough question, even if you found it confusing, right away you can rule out two options because they're not actually in the text. And from there, you've only got A, B, and C. You can see B is a premise, but it's not really supported by anything else, so it's not that. And you've got down between A and C. So even if you're not sure, you could probably eliminate most of the options and have like a 50-50 chance of getting it right.
So E, I actually dwelled on E I should know better, but E is not contained anywhere in the passage, right? It does say that the official investigations failed, right? And they weren't properly explaining the attacks, but this type of question, because it says main conclusion, there's another type of question that we'll go over in the next workshop, which is the whole like what is a conclusion that could be reasonably drawn from the argument. And then in those cases, it could be E. But when the question has the key phrase, remember when you see the two words main conclusion, just remember it's always in the passage. Do not bring in any new knowledge, any new opinions, anything like that. Just always look in the passage and you'll be able to strike off D and E right away. And also injuries, the injuries were only mentioned to support the failure in the investigations, right? Like if you look at the third sentence, it says local people talk of a number of big cats such as pumas being irresponsible. So it was kind of already mentioned. And then everything after that was to sort of support that claim. And it all brings back together with a restatement of the claim that the pumas were responsible for the attack. So just be aware of where the arguments are first mentioned. And if there's something I've learned from this with Adam and Catherine, it's structure. Structure is important.
I just wanted to add about B. It's very easy to accidentally think that B is the conclusion, but because you might think that it's easy to get confused between the attacks which are being questioned, the cause of the attacks are being questioned, and then you can also think that the cause of the sightings are being questioned, but the sightings are actually being used in order to back up statements about the attacks themselves. So it's important not to get confused between the attacks, which are the conclusion is going to be about attacks themselves, whereas any things about the sightings are going to be one of the premises.
Yeah, I just wanted this wasn't about this actual question, but I just wanted to jump in and say, like some of the critical thinking questions is a bit weird, and the structure is kind of weird, and it's not necessarily something you do a lot in school, or at least I'd never done it before in school. I'd never really kind of thought about passages like this. And one thing I found really helpful in general was just getting like, I'm not sure if it would work if you're in the US, but if you're in the UK, they used to teach us a bit called critical thinking at A level, and like the critical thinking questions are literally just this, right? I spoke to my philosophy teacher and she gave me an old textbook she had when they used to teach it, and it's just full of like, this is a premise, this is a conclusion, this is how you identify the conclusion, this is how you identify the premises, and it's got like tons of like practice questions. And nowhere really does critical thinking anymore, so it's quite easy to get a hold of like old textbooks quite cheaply. So I think if there's something you find difficult, which like I think most people did when they first saw it, like definitely check that out. Like see if you can get a critical thinking textbook or like some exercises and just go through them, and you'll get like a lot better at practice.
We're going to switch shortly. As part of the homework, we will assign like 20 of these main conclusion questions for you guys to do. So just like keep doing them in a row, right? Keep doing them, and really with each question, each successive question, refine your strategy. I hope you guys took something out of that part. We're going to switch now to the other side. So you guys will be in very good hands with Janey and was on the other side,
Jonah.
And Jonah, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's go. You guys stay right here. We'll move digitally. I have no idea how this works. Okay. Oh, okay.
Are you recording this, Theo? Then I don't need to.
No. I'm jumping over to the other group.
No, you're okay. So I'll okay, I'll record this then when you jump over.
Okay, brilliant. How do I jump? Can someone jump me?
I think you can just click on breakout rooms and then join the other one.
Really?
Yeah, if you click
Surely
breakout
you
rooms.
know where the breakout room button is. Yeah.
Fuck me.
Well, I might be. I don't know if I can mute. I'll try. But
I got it now. I got it. Catherine needs to do it manually. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Cameras on, people. We want to see some faces. Cameras on, guys. Let's see some people. Don't be afraid. Cameras are on.
It's midnight in my time zone, and I was in my pajamas, so
It's okay. I'm not wearing pants.
yeah, it's midnight here.
I just woke up. It's like 9 a.m. here.
It's like 12 a.m. here in my time zone. Sorry.
Are you in Hong Kong?
No, I'm in Shanghai.
In Shanghai? Oh, wow. Brilliant.
Yeah. But thanks so much for hosting this. Really lovely.
Adam and Catherine, do you want to get going then?
Yeah. Adam, do you want to start because you did the first question, and we'll just go from there?
How was the previous session with Jonah and Janey? It's good. Yeah. All right. Cool.
Okay, can you see my screen right now?
Oh, it was great, but they forgot to record it.
They forgot to record it. Oh well, that's just great. Wait a second. Oh, now I'm just recording this thing twice then. Okay. Wait. But wait, no. Jonah's recording the other one, so don't worry. Like it'll be restated, but Jonah's going to record on the other room, so we'll have both.
Okay, we ready?
Yes.
Okay, so we're doing the main conclusion questions. So I just restate my method for going through this kind of question. First thing you should do before you even read this paragraph is read this short question here so that you can identify what type of critical thinking question you're doing, which is in this case, all of these are going to be the main conclusion ones. And then my preferred method is to read this and then read the paragraph. Though, depending on what you find most successful, you might want to also just read the 5 points before you go through and then try and figure out which is the main conclusion. And the number one piece of advice I would give you is to try and figure out what sentence in the paragraph is logically following from all the other ones. So all of the other sentences are going to be pointing towards this one point, and your conclusion will always be within the paragraph. You're not looking for something outside of the paragraph. Okay, so first question, this one about conspicuous consumption. Would someone like to jump in and give their answer to this question?
Luke, would you please provide the answer?
What's the question? Which one is it?
It's question 2 from the homework set.
I got D.
Yeah, do you want to go through and tell us why you think that's the conclusion to this paragraph?
I think there was just one sentence that stood out. I can't remember which one it was. Sorry, I'm just reading.
Adam, can you zoom in a little bit? I'm just worried for people
yeah.
who are on really small screens. Yeah, perfect.
Oh, to be truly happy now, we should devote more time to the activities that dominated life back then. So I just thought it was the idea that we should behave in the same way that our ancestors did.
Yeah, so you just want to be sure that you've got the correct answer, so don't worry about that. You just want to be sure when you're going through there are many points within these 5 that are also within the paragraph, but you've got to be certain that they're not just points being used. You've got to be certain that they're the actual concluding statement. So, for example, point A, sending out signals to impress others is a waste of time. You can see that in the paragraph here. We put too much effort into sending signals that don't actually impress others and cause us stress. So that is a point that's being made, but that in the end leads you to conclude that we should stop doing that and we should go back to a kind of lifestyle that we had before. So yeah, you've got the correct answer. It's D. The point I'm making here is basically just make sure that even though what you see is within the paragraph, it's not a point being used, it's the actual concluding point. So everything will lead into that. Does anybody have any questions about this paragraph?
Main conclusion, when you see the 2 words main conclusion in the question, it's always in the paragraph. There's no need to derive any further thinking. There's no need to bring in your own personal opinions or to look any further than the black and white text right above. Main conclusion, it's always right above, always.
Okay, should we move on to the next question?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So same deal. Could someone talk us through how they approach this question? It doesn't matter if you got it wrong or right. I'm not really interested in that. I'm just curious about how people kind of identify the conclusion, and then I'll talk about like what I do.
Get Susie, please.
I'm just trying to reread. I put C. I'm trying to look for where I got the main conclusion from.
Yeah, don't worry. Like you can read it through. Take your time.
Okay. So I kind of got it from I think it's 3rd sentence. This is not a legitimate definition because it's a measure of inequality rather than poverty. So it's giving the original definition, which is that it's measuring poverty in relation to average income, and then saying that's wrong. So I put C.
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think that's a good way of approaching it. I think this is one of those questions where we talked about how the conclusion is like always in the text. That's quite useful to think about, and also like the scope of the argument. So just looking at like A, B, C, D, E options here, we can eliminate some already, right? So B, it is impossible to find an appropriate definition of poverty. Like that's not anywhere in the passage. It's not suggested anywhere. So we know B can't be the main conclusion. D as well, a huge pay rise from middle managers makes other people poor. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. So like, you can get rid of that, but also it's not in the text. So you can eliminate that as well, right? So that means you've got A, C, and E. Okay, let's look at E then. There is no inequality in a society where most people are starving. Again, that doesn't like make sense. It's not in the passage. I'm not even sure what that would mean. So get rid of E anyway. So we've kind of now left with A and C. So this is where I probably look at like the scope of the passage. So like Adam said, like the conclusion, the whole passage is building towards that, right? Like the passage is going to make a lot of points probably, but like there's going to be one main point that it all kind of focuses on and it all goes towards. Like in this one especially, the argument literally it's like, the whole passage is just talking about the effects of defining poverty in relation to average income and why that's bad. So like A is in the passage. It says that, having relative income can be said, it talks about having like middle managers making other people poor. It does sort of mention A, but the whole passage is kind of talking about the flaws in the definition with poverty in regards to average income. And because the whole passage is building towards this one point, C, we know that's the right answer. So I guess that's how I'd approach it, like eliminating some options and then thinking about like what the passage as a whole builds towards.
Isn't A supporting C, right? A is
right.
Yeah.
A,
Yeah,
therefore
like,
C.
like we can see kind of see A in the text as well. So, you know, it says, if we look at the consequence definition, if we give a pay rise to some people, then other people would be in poverty. So, you know, A is kind of in the text, you know, even if your income is relatively low, it doesn't mean you're poor. But yeah, like you said, A literally would support C. And if it supports something else, then it can't be the main conclusion, because the main conclusion is supported by everything else. So it has to be C.
Also, this is a particularly good question just to point out. A mistake that I often made when I was doing this was I would think that the conclusion has to be coming at the end of the paragraph, but that's absolutely not the case. So in this question, the conclusion is actually right here in the slap bang in the middle. So the conclusion, you shouldn't be relying on its placement within the paragraph to try and tell you what the conclusion is. You should be relying on the actual content of the sentences and where they lead you to thinking. Okay, any questions on this one? Okay, so next question. Would someone like to jump in, tell us their thinking process for this question?
Let's get Patricia in on this.
I put D for my answer. It should be illegal for doctors to prescribe cannabis, but I don't really remember why, so I'm just going to read the passage.
Okay.
Explaining your thinking is really important. Well, please continue reading the passage, but explaining your thinking is important, especially when it comes up to interviews, because if you look at every single interview advice video from the tutors, all they talk about all day long is, we want to hear how you're thinking, right? Even if you have the wrong answer, we want to hear your thought process, because sometimes it's not about getting the right answer, it's about how you approached it. And you know, the better you can express yourself like that and practice expressing yourself like that and explaining yourself, the better, you know. So.
I put D because of the third phrase, because it says if doctors were allowed, then there would be a solution for the problem, and moreover, like, it gives more benefits to that, so that's why I put D.
Mm-hmm.
So why is it not B?
Because I didn't put B because I thought B isn't the main point. The main point is to solve B, which is a problem. Then you should put, like, you should legalize D, and D would solve B. So the main conclusion is D, therefore.
Brilliant. So again, B is supporting D. There's not much else to add to that, I think. Catherine, do you have anything to say?
Answer. Yeah, really. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. So if one thing supports the other, then the supporting thing can't possibly be the main conclusion, right? So the main conclusion, everything flows to the main conclusion.
Okay. Any questions on this one? Okay. Next question.
Let's have Milton, could you answer this one? Can you talk us through what your thought process on this?
Yeah, sorry. Looking at the paragraph. So I'm just looking at my method is kind of to look through the paragraph sentence by sentence, and usually some of the sentences will support another sentence, and some of the sentences will provide further evidence. And from what I see, the first sentence is just contextual knowledge. The second sentence is what happened before.
Yep.
And so that is contrasted with the third sentence and the fourth sentence, which leads to the conclusion in the fifth sentence that it is now vital to seek some sort of planned response. And looking at the options, A is one of those, like, I would call them intermediate conclusions, not really the right ones. B is not right, it's irrelevant. C is C is potentially correct. It's sort of similar to the conclusion we've got. D is again not the main conclusion. E is, yeah, so I guess probably E supports C in that if market forces have limited effects, then a planned response is necessary. Therefore, it's C would be my answer.
Yeah, that's good. You're right, and I think that's a really nice way of looking at it, sentence by sentence. I think this is a good example of like another like technique you can use, which is looking at like some of the words in the statement to think about how the argument flows. So if you look for words kind of like so, therefore, thus, in order to, that can kind of show you like what's meant to follow from each step in the argument. Like what Milton did, you know, if you look at each sentence, but the words they're using, it tells you which supports which and where it's heading. So in this one, I think the big giveaway is in that last sentence. So it is now vital. So the whole so, we can tell that, you know, it means the stuff that came before supports this idea, which is the main conclusion. I mean, I'll go through all the options as well, and I'll kind of talk about why we reject them. So A is in the text, but it's not really built up to. B is also in the text, but like we were talking about before with like what isn't a conclusion. A and B both support C. So because we can use them as supporting evidence, we know that the conclusions, you can reject them. D isn't in the text, I don't think. Oh wait, no, damn, it is. I can't read. D is in the text, but it supports C again. And E is in the text right at the start. It talks about what used to happen. But if you look at the language we use, we've got like some stuff about the background. Then we have but now, which is the environment. The but shows us that we're contrasting what is happening now with what used to happen. So we know that stuff we did in the past isn't what the author's agreeing with, which means that E can't be like the conclusion really, because the author kind of sets it up at the beginning and then rejects it with the but. So that means the conclusion has to be C. So yeah, by focusing in on those kind of the language in the text, the words that you're using, you can kind of see how it flows, see what supports what, and then you can figure out the conclusion from that.
You can almost rewrite the whole passage using just the answers, right? If you use D, A, and B, and what I like to do is I verbalize it in my head a little bit, right? I try to make like a new passage in my head, and I'm thinking like D, the recent environmental changes cannot be reversed. Market forces cannot prevent global famine. Environmental changes will now have devastating effects on world agriculture. And then I'm thinking, okay, therefore, a planned response to current environmental change is necessary. And I'm thinking in my head, like, does that flow, right? Like, is that how I would write a sentence? And that sounds like it makes sense, right? We had 3 supporting points, and then we had 1 primary conclusion supported by the 3 points. So that's one way I like to do it, which is to almost insert words like therefore into the answers, and you can kind of see if it logically flows. If it doesn't flow, it might not be the correct answer. So
also it's important with E is a statement here that is made. So you might mistakenly think this is the conclusion, but you have to take into account that the rest of the paragraph from there on is not leading into, it's not contributing to the view stated in E. It's talking about something completely different. So you shouldn't get confused and think this is the conclusion that's being made.
Yeah, like Milton said, a lot of the first couple sentences are usually like padding. They introduce some kind of perspective, they give a little bit of background, or they give something that can later be contrasted with. So those are not those are just the premises. They're not the conclusion. Yeah. All right. That's
Okay. Question 35. So someone want to take this one?
Let's get Lottie.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm not so sure. I'm just reading the question.
Okay, take your time.
I suppose you could say that the writer's not suggesting that it is fair, because they're saying that commentators have said that what happened in the race was fair, but actually the writer's disagreeing with that. So he's saying it's kind of unfair.
Well, this is a mistake I made when I started to read this as well. He does at the start, the writer of this, say some commentators view the failed attempt by a great driver, blah, blah, blah. You might think that because he says some commentators that he's then going to go on and disagree. Oops. But actually, if you look at what's said afterwards, that everything, all of the points that he makes do actually lead to the conclusion that he started with. So don't be thrown off by the statement some commentators, because he does in the end agree with those commentators.
Okay.
So
what did you think the answer was, Lottie?
I can't remember. I did it a while ago.
Okay, so in the end, the answer was A. It was not unfair of the leading drivers to steer into his rival's car. So reading on through the rest of the paragraph after this point here, had he succeeded, he would have won the championship because he was ahead in points. That's a statement to support the idea that it's in his self-interest to go on and steer into someone. And this here, it may have been dangerous and irresponsible, but it was not unfair. That there is pretty much the conclusion that will tell you the answer. And as we go on through the rest, all of these points are, some of these points are also made down here, but they're all leading in the end to the statement that it was not unfair and that the author agrees with the commentators.
Okay, thanks.
You have to, yeah, you have to, again, remember that like sometimes the contrasting of the passage will begin with the word but, or sometimes it will start with like on the other hand or something like that. In this case, he starts off the sort of argument with fair, why not, right? And then the rest of that is his argument. So Catherine mentioned it in the last group. You want to look for certain words. We're going to assign 20 of these questions as practice for homework alongside 20 of each of the other ones. And once you do them over and over again, you'll really realize like, you know, the TSA writing style is pretty consistent and they use very similar words to introduce arguments and to introduce context and things like that. So you'll really get a good hang of it. Don't worry if you're thrown off a little bit right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, should we move on to the next question? Yeah.
It's the last one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the other guys are done, so we'll move this one on.
Okay, cool. Can I have a volunteer? Go for it. Like it's cool if you get it wrong. I'm just curious about how people approach this one because it's a little trickier.
We get Zoom.
I can.
Okay,
oh, great, no.
Oh yeah, I was gonna try. So this one was a little bit confusing for me because it has like a counter argument within it. So I guess it's like the investigator's point of perspective would be like what I would say was like the counter argument. They were saying that the sightings of the supposed big cats were really just domestic cats. And so it goes on to say the injuries cannot be caused by like cats. But really the sentence that kind of sold me on, I put A, and the reason why is the very last sentence, big cats such as pumas must be responsible for these attacks. So
right, yeah, that's right. And yeah, the reasoning there is good, I think. This one is interesting, like the structure is a little different. Some people find it kind of tricky. I'll talk about kind of how I looked at it, and then I can talk about like another way you can get to A, I think. So I think if we look at like the structure of the argument through the whole text, right from the second sentence, the nature of these injuries indicates that a large predator must have been responsible. We get this kind of claim that it must be a large predator. We have a situation, you know, there's been injuries and we have this like response, well, the injuries are such that it must be a large predator. Next up, with the whole stuff about the local people being seen in the investigations, like that doesn't really affect that argument. Like it's not really kind of like rebutting it or anything. It suggests, the fact that they've seen big cats and they've kind of said, no, they're not big cats, doesn't change the initial argument that the injuries show that it must have been a big cat. And then right at the end, again, with the but these investigations, we return to this kind of idea that the injuries are only explainable by big cats, right? And then obviously the conclusion follows that if we have injuries and they're only explainable by big cats, then big cats must be responsible for the injuries. So that's one way you can do it, by kind of looking at how the argument is structured and going from there. Another way you can do it is, again, just looking at the options and eliminating them and then kind of going from there. So if we look at A, B, C, D, E, I'll just go from E. So E, for example, suggests that investigation should have been more thorough. That's not even in the text, so we can throw that one out straight away. Same thing for D. There must be a large population of big cats, such as pumas. That's not in the text. If you're finding the main conclusion, you shouldn't have to infer anything. It's right there in the text. So we know those two must be wrong. C, the injuries cannot have been caused by domestic cats. Again, that's in the text, but that supports the claim that it's pumas. Hopefully, that makes sense, that you guys can see that, right? If it hasn't been domestic cats, that supports the claim that it was pumas. So while C is in the text, it can't be a conclusion because it's supporting something else. B again is the same logic there. Sightings of big cats cannot be explained as sightings of domestic cats. That's true and it's in the text, but that's supporting the overall argument.
Sorry to interrupt. I think B was saying actually something that's contradicted by the text, where it says local people talk about sightings, but official investigations have dismissed these as domestic cats.
Yeah. See, that's dismissed in the text as well. And then A is the strongest claim. It's also right there in the text in the last sentence, which the whole thing builds up to, and we can tell that A is supported by C. So even if you found the passage confusing, if you can kind of just read it through, see what's there and what isn't there, like Adam said, see what contradicts it and what's just not in it, you can get it down to A and C, right? And then we know that C supports A, so by that logic, A is the main conclusion. So that's two ways you can look at it, the overall structure, or you can kind of just rule out options and then go from there. Hopefully that's helpful. If anyone has any questions, just kind of say something.
We should, does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, we're going to jump back into the main pool. Has everyone kind of taken something away from the main conclusion workshop here? We're going to, again, we're going to assign homework. We're going to go through, the homework is going to literally just be this question type. That's why I told people don't jump ahead on the past papers, because you're going to start memorizing the questions and you don't want to do that. You want to approach these questions methodically, think about what Adam and Catherine told you, look for sentence structure, look for, remember premises are followed by conclusions, just really apply these skills. And you'll be able to really get these ones right. And remember, don't get fooled, because there's actually a different type of question which says which one of the following is a conclusion which can be drawn from the passage. Remember, this strategy only applies to questions that say main conclusion. Okay, the other type of question we'll go over in the next workshop, but for these you have to look for the words main conclusion. The other one is a different type of conclusion. So anyways, let's jump back. Theo, can you dissolve us and we'll make it back into the primary group, please?
Yep, I'll do that now.
Cheers, thanks.
There you go. Right, all yours, Janey.
Okay, fantastic. Let me find my screen. Okay, here we are. So my little segment is on applying principles. So little overview of how that is basically, you'll get a little passage and it will draw some conclusion based off a principle, a reason, whatever. And you just sort of have to draw out what that principle is, and it'll tend to ask you which of the following best illustrates it, or I think there's slightly different ones, or which is an application of the principle, that kind of thing. So for example, if your principle is killing is always wrong, you might be a pacifist or whatever. And my general advice for this is that normally you will have a sentence or a half sentence or something within your passage that will tell you what the principle is. And so if you can circle that or make a note of it. That's normally the best way of doing it. Does anyone want to start us off chatting about this first question? Sort of let me know your thought process, anything like that. If not, I can just go. I don't mind.
I can go over it if you want.
Go for it.
So basically what this argument is saying is that sometimes we have to make choices that minimize losses. So here it says there still remains the ability to act for the greatest good with the for the greatest number, and this can be possible by just doing like different things, and then at the end they just kind of like say like sorry, that has to be the case. And so the choice that kind of responds to that the most is that harms the least number of people, which is kind of like a similar argument. So I chose B. I'm not sure if that's correct.
That is correct. And yeah, you pointed it out absolutely. So in this passage, the bit that like signposts your principle is in every situation where every course of action is immoral, there still remains the ability to act for the greatest good for the greatest number. So that's the principle we're working on, because that's the reason that's given us the conclusion of therefore we have to eliminate the outsiders. So yeah, B matches that most closely because it's describing the same thing, greatest good for greatest number, but just the other way around, the least harm for the least number. Any questions on that? Fantastic. We'll move on to the next one. I'll give people a sec to read it, and then if anyone wants to jump in, feel free. Does anyone want to come in?
I think I could answer this one if nobody else wants to.
Brilliant, thank you, go for it.
So basically, with these questions, I always try and word it differently, but as simple as possible. So the passage, like at its core, basically saying action is worse than like inaction. So if you do something actively, it's worse than if you do something passively, even if it comes to the same conclusion. And so the only one of the options that really follows that structure is C, because it's saying that the people who actively break the law are the problem rather than the people who passively don't support the crime prevention program. And I think C is right.
Yeah, absolutely, that's correct. So yeah, the sentence in this one that sort of draws out the principle is the last sentence. So doing something makes me more responsible for the consequences than when I fail to act. That's the principle we're working on, which gives them their conclusion about starvation, whatever. So yeah, C is the same thing. So you're just looking for an example that says doing something is worse than not doing something, essentially. And yeah, that's in C, saying that the people who've committed the crimes are worse than the people who've failed to support the prevention programs, as you've explained well. So yeah, that's it. Fantastic. Any questions? Nope. Brilliant. And then last one from me, again, I'll give people a minute to reread, familiarize, etc. Okay, anyone want to come in?
Yeah.
I can.
Oh. You go, I don't mind.
Oh, okay. So the passage was basically just saying that people as a collective shouldn't have to pay for something if not everyone is going to like go use that service. So pretty much B was the only one that kind of followed that, because it was saying that taxpayers shouldn't pay for London's system if not everyone's going to go to London. It's not going to benefit them. So that was the one that followed the question.
Yeah, fantastic. That's the correct answer. Yeah, so in this passage, here we go. This last bit is so the first couple of sentences are just kind of context, and then we've got the reason, since no one should be forced to subsidise services which they themselves do not use. Conclusion, taxpayers' money should not be used to support the arts. So yeah, your principle is no one should be forced to subsidise services which they themselves do not use. And yeah, as you've said, B is the one that maps that, because it's saying that if you shouldn't have to pay for London transport if you don't use London transport. But yeah, fantastic. Well done, everyone. Yeah, my main top tips on this is, yeah, you will always have a little sentence or half sentence in there that gives you your principle. If you're struggling to work out what it is, it'll be the reason for the conclusion they draw. So yeah, killing is wrong, therefore I'm a pacifist, for example, or like whatever it is. Yeah, in this one, you shouldn't subsidize something that you don't use, therefore the conclusion here is that taxpayers' money should be used to support the arts. That's sort of the best way of doing it, I would suggest. But yeah, a lot of this is quite intuitive. And well done, everyone. I will pass over.
Right, I'll mute myself this time. That's one mistake mitigated. Right, so what I'm going to be going through is the matching arguments type questions. So these, I'll just share the same sort of thing that Janey had up, but I'll be looking at my questions, which are to do with matching arguments. Now, what matching arguments questions are one of those where if you get the process right, and if you get the right, if you approach the question with the right attitude and know what you're trying to work out, then actually I think these are one of the most straightforward types of questions that there are in the TSA. So essentially what you want to do is, and you can do this instinctively if you've got the hang of it, but it also helps at the start to do it by writing it down, is you want to strip the argument that you're being presented with, right, in the question to sort of X's and Y's and Z's, right? So you want to strip it back to its most fundamental premise form, and I'll explain how to do that in a second, and then see which of the options maps that, right? So I'm going to go through the first question. This isn't actually the one I wanted to go through. Right, this one. So I'm going to go through, this is 2008-22, I think, and show you how I would strip back this argument, how I would interpret that, and also do the same for A to E. I'm going to do all of them, and then for the last two questions, I'll open it up to people trying to do it themselves, just so you can get an idea of the way to approach it. So the argument in the question is, you can become a good pianist if you start to learn at an early age. You did not start to learn until you were an adult, so you cannot become a good pianist, right? So the way that I would think of this is, if you start to learn at an age, if X, then you can become a good pianist, then you can Y, right? That's the way that I think about it. X is starting at an early age, Y is be a good pianist. So that's the way that I'm looking, that's the way you need to approach this, is what are the premises here? What's the fundamental structure? If X, then you can Y. The second half is, you did not start to learn until you were an adult. So no X, right? Because X is starting to learn at an early age. Therefore, you cannot become a good pianist. Thus, no Y. That's how I would strip back the questions argument, right? X is starting to learn at an early age. Y is be a good pianist. The argument goes, if you start to learn at an early age, if X, then you can become a good pianist, then Y. You didn't start to learn at an early age, no X, therefore you cannot become a good pianist, no Y. Does that make sense, right? That's the simple argument that's being laid out. So now what I want to do is to go through A to E and see what are the arguments here laid out and which one maps that one. So A goes, children can become fluent in 2 languages if they start learning when they're young. So I would see that as, if they start learning when they're young, if X, then they can become fluent, then can Y. The second half is, my children learn 2 languages when they're young, so they can speak them fluently. You see, this is different because this says X did actually happen, so therefore Y also happened. Okay, because they did learn when they were young, so they can speak them fluently. That's the structure of A, and it doesn't map our question, so the answer is not A. B, you can cure your headache if you're willing to try acupuncture. So if you're willing to try acupuncture, if X, you can cure your headache, then can Y. You refuse to try acupuncture, so no X, therefore you won't be able to cure your headaches, thus no Y. Now you can see that that one maps the question, right? The logical structure of this one maps the one that we had at the start. So the answer is going to be B, right, for that reason. So you can start to learn at an early age. If you're willing to try acupuncture, you can become a good pianist, you can cure your headache. You didn't start to learn when you were a young age, you refuse to try acupuncture, so you can't become a good pianist, so you can't cure your headache. You can see how that lays itself out. Right, C. You can avoid being overweight if you take sufficient exercise. So if you take sufficient exercise, if X, oh, why is that smaller? So if X, if you take sufficient exercise, you can avoid becoming overweight, so you can Y, with Y being avoiding overweight. And you take sufficient exercise, so X is true, thus Y is also true. Okay, so that's that argument, but it's different. D, children have fewer ear infections if they take cod liver oil, so that's if you take cod liver oil. If X, children have fewer ear infections, so then Y. My children have very few ear infections, so they do not need to take cod liver oil. Now, I wasn't sure about this one because I'm not convinced that children having few ear infections is the same as fewer ear infections. So I kind of put children having fewer ear infections as a separate thing, like Z, so that thus they won't need to take cod liver oil, so thus no Y, right? Either way, it doesn't map onto the question, and that's the important one. Don't worry about it if, like, the important thing is what most closely maps to the question. If you can't see it mapping, then don't worry about it. Also, the other thing is bad arguments are very difficult to actually analyze. So if it's a bad argument, then you probably don't need to worry about it. So then finally, mapping E, you can become a good singer if you have perfect pitch. So if X, if you have perfect pitch, you can become a good singer. You can Y. You are a good singer. Y is true, right? And so you must have perfect pitch, thus X. Okay, so although, again, that makes sense, it doesn't map onto our question, only B does. But I hope you can see that what I wanted to do by going through those 6 is that's how you think about these questions. And then once you get into the process of doing that, it becomes more instinctive, right? Are there any questions quickly off the back of that as to how you approach an argument and strip it back? No questions on that? Right, so what we're going to do now is just go over the last 2 questions, but actually I want you guys to strip that back in the way that I did and find out where the X's and Y's are, etc. So here's question 46. If you intend to have a fire, you will need dry kindling wood and you'll need a fire lighter. Unfortunately, the kindling wood has been left out in the rain. So even though you have a fire lighter, you will not be able to light the fire. Does anyone want to have a go at putting that into argument form?
Yeah, I can.
Yep.
So I write it without like any letters, so it just really makes sense to me. So I'm not sure.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, no, we can do that as well. That's fine.
But just for, so I've just put X for fire, X,
yep.
Then A, B for kindling wood and firelight. I just put it in brackets.
Yep.
Yeah, and then no A.
Yep, no A.
No A, and then comma B.
Yep.
But separate clauses.
Yep.
Therefore, no X.
Thus, no X. Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so basically, to have X, to have fire, we need 2 things, A and B. We have one of them. Well, sorry, we don't have one, which is no kindling wood, because that's been left out in the rain. You have to make a little jump there, but it's acceptable. And we do have B, we have a fire lighter, but no X, because we need both. So that's the structure of the question, right? Now, instead of going through all of them, just to be wary of time, does anyone want to, you can have a little bit of time to look at the A's to E's. Which one do you think most maps that out and then give the argument form of that? Anyone have any idea?
Yeah.
Yep. So which one? Sorry.
A.
Yep. So what's the argument form of A then?
It's the train is X.
Yep. So if X.
So if X, you need time. So I guess a Y or A.
Yep.
And the platform.
Yep.
So B. Even though you have A, you don't have B.
Yep.
So no.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So now you might notice that there's a slight difference between the order. So in question we had no A and B, and in A we had no B but A, but it doesn't really matter because the allocation of letters is kind of arbitrary with respect to the order, right? You could switch the order around. The point is you need 2 things, you have one, not the other, so you can't have what you needed both for. And that's basically how that works. So yes, that's right. The answer for 46 is A. So moving on to the last one. I've lost it again. Well, there you go. Okay, now this one was this one is a little bit trickier, I think, because I don't think it's laid out as clearly as the others. I am going to let, if someone wants to have a go at how they think they'd analyse that one, then that's fine. So does anyone have a gist at how they do that? So I'll just read it out quickly. Criminals often give themselves away by their lifestyle. That's irrelevant, right? Not to the argument. So the argument is, my neighbour is a criminal because he bought and is living in a very expensive house, which I know he cannot afford, as he is officially working only in a poorly paid job. So what's the argument there, or at least an attempt of what the argument would be? Anyone got any ideas? If not, I'll go for it. Oh yeah.
I guess I could pitch in.
Okay.
So this person is living in a house, and you need money to get this expensive house.
Yep.
And he's working in a poorly paid job, so therefore he cannot possibly get the house.
Yeah.
So so I thought it was B, because here they say that you need a specific amount of time to do something, but this person has done more than what's like needed. So yeah, so it kind of like corresponds.
That is exactly the right type of thinking, and it is. The answer is B. So the way that to use an XY form, although you explained it very well, the way that I thought about it is, if, let's say, for example, if you are in a poorly paid job or you have little money, so let's make that X, then you can't have an expensive house. So then no Y, right? But my neighbor does have Y, so my neighbor Y, therefore no X, right? So as in, he can't only be in a poorly paid job, he must be a criminal, right? There is a jump there. Again, like I said, you don't worry about getting them perfectly, because you do have to sometimes make a couple of assumptions, but if you go through the thought process, you'll get the closest one to it. So that's the question, I think. If X, then no Y. My neighbor does have Y, so he must have no X, or something other than X at least. Now the structure of B is analogous to that. So the way that I'd do it is, if you spend less than half an hour, so if X, then you can't write more than 4 pages, then no Y, right? Because that's what the first thing says. It's impossible to write more than 4 pages if you spend half an hour or less. Now you have handed in 7 pages, so Y is true, right? You have handed in more than 4 pages, so thus no X, which means there must be something other than X. You've spent longer than half an hour, and that does map on to the question. So yeah, the answer would be B. And yeah, I think that kind of wraps up the way that you approach those questions. I hope that's helped in terms of the thought process. Are there any questions off the back of that, off the back of matching argument questions specifically? And if not, are there any questions generally about sort of the TSA or any of the questions that we've gone through, that just before we go back into the main group?
Do you think you need to spend longer on problem solving than you would critical thinking, like with all the maths?
It kind of, that part of that is knowing your strengths and weaknesses, I would say. So if it kind of depends, if you're, how do I phrase this? You're trying to maximize the level of efficiency so that you can get through every question. And if that means that you have to spend longer on problem solving questions, you should realize that, well, I can compensate by that because I'm very good at critical thinking questions. So you have to pick your poison, essentially. I wouldn't say problem solving questions should be done with a greater amount of time if you then can't do the critical thinking. So you have to maximize the amount of time that you spend, maximize the allocation of time. And that will depend on your strengths and weaknesses. So yeah, I hope that kind of, basically it depends. You have to know how much time you do have to spend on a question so that you're giving each question the same amount of effort. Maybe that's the right way of thinking, or the same amount of chances of getting it right, something like that.
Thank you.
Don't know if Janey, you want to say anything on that, or?
I think you've covered that well. Just looking at the chat, in terms of what sort of score you need to aim for, for most courses you're looking in the 60s in terms of your like converted score. For PP and E&M, you really want to be aiming for the 70s because they're both more competitive courses in terms of your like converted score. So that's probably what you want to aim for. Although like it depends on each paper to how many you need to get right, etc. But like as you do past papers, you can see the conversion of the raw mark anyway. And other question, do you record your answers on another sheet? Well, you've got paper for, it depends. I don't know if you're doing it online or on paper. So we did ours online, so we were just clicking them through. But if it's on paper, you'll have a sheet to like mark off A, B, C, D, E, and you'll have separate paper for working out. So I would just put your answers in as you go.
Just to add on to that very quickly, definitely, well, again, different people work in different ways, but I found I got through so many scribble sheets, right? Like you do, like have loads by yourself, even if, you know, you're like writing slanted, not according to the lines, just trying to eliminate options quickly. Like that doesn't matter, right? Paper can be spared, your TSA score can't be. So like just use those papers to eliminate answers quickly and to basically lay out your thought process as quickly as you possibly can. Even in trial and error style still, it's very useful to have a paper by just to visualize things. And particularly with the things like with the X and Y questions, if you are going to approach it with that, you want to have something by you just to be able to write it out very quickly. So I definitely would recommend having paper.
I think I'll just say something about the TSA scores that we got, because the TSA scores as to what's a good score changes a lot year on year. I know last year there was a lot of inflation, and everyone's, if you can look at the distributions each year, and I'd recommend you do that when you see the converted score that you get on each paper, because last year's were a lot higher. And I noticed that on the first papers, the 2008, 2009, I was scoring a lot lower with my converted score even than I was on the more recent papers. So don't be disheartened if you're not getting similar scores to last year, because those grades were inflated compared to previous years. I don't know what it's going to be like for your year when you sit it, but bear that in mind.
And you can, to add on to that, you can look at the distribution for the specific paper that you try to do as a past paper, and so that's how you can correlate your score essentially. I think that's all on the website, isn't it? Or you can kind of, I think it's all generally on the website, the distributions.
Yeah, I think on the Oxford website, I think I was using a different sort of TSA tutoring website that had them all aggregated.
Yeah.
But if you find a site that has them all on and
go admission statistics, they normally show you, don't they, as well?
Yeah.
Also some questions on doing the essay question. So I think that's just marked by the tutors, that you don't really find out about how well you've done on that. In terms of the best way to approach it, it really depends on like your personal preference. There's a load of videos on YouTube about different ways of doing it, so definitely have a look at those. But the main thing is pick a question that you're most comfortable with, like that you, even if you feel like it seems like an easier question or whatever, pick the one you're most comfortable with. Don't try and like be clever for the sake of being clever or whatever. Pick the one that you're comfortable with. You want no more than 3 points realistically. Basically, if you can go like 4 against 4, but like your last 4 might be, or like against 4 against whatever, but like your last one will probably be quite short. That's the main thing. So yeah, spend like good 5 minutes planning, because it's so short, but you need to like know where your argument is. And yeah, just do what you're most confident with. Make sure you like understand the question you're answering, so pick it apart. If you can say something interesting and unique, that's obviously going to put you in better stead. But yeah, main thing is question you're comfortable with. Spend the time planning. It is really worth doing. And yeah, I would say no more than 3 points, and like have a practice, because you'll kind of gauge how long you need to plan how long you need to write. Sort of the more you do them, you'll sort of work out how quick you are, or all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, the thing I'd add on to that as well is, is it 30 minutes you get for the TSA? I can't remember.
I think it's 30 minutes for the essay.
Okay, so what I'd recommend is you get 30 minutes in the actual exam. When you're doing your practice, try 25. And so not actually try, like limit yourself to 25. And if you go over, and not like you finish the sentence, as in you stop at 25, and if the sentence isn't done, then the sentence isn't done. Because like that level of discipline means that when you get to the actual exam, you will feel so much more confident, because like 5 minutes is a massive deal, right, in a 30-minute essay. And so if you can limit yourself to 25 minutes, then when you get into the actual exam and you have the extra level of panic and nerves that is inevitable, you'll actually be able to compensate for that, because you have learned how to write the essay in a shorter amount of time than you're actually going to be given. So I would really recommend that, and to be strict about it. Like I one in an earlier, like, it's a different type of exam that I did. I remember in the practice ones, I sort of let myself have a couple of sentences over each time because I thought I'd be finding the real thing, and I wasn't. So, like, be strict with it and you'll feel so much better in the real thing.
And I'd look now to see whether you're doing the test online or not, because that's going to have a huge impact as to how much you can write, because you'll probably find that you can type 2 or 3 times as fast as you can write it. And if you are typing, although you can write more, I wouldn't necessarily write 2 to 3 times more, because again, it's all about the quality of your argument and making sure that you have concise but effective points. Were there any other questions in the chat? Oh, why were last year's scores higher? I have no idea.
Yeah,
it
we
was
don't
really
know.
strange because Oxford controlled the distribution, so they could have made it exactly the same and in line with last year. There was no reason. It wasn't like with A-levels where they had to please students, so no idea. I think the other group are finishing soon. I'll head over, see where they're at.
And the question on the E&Mers, I think E&Mers don't have to do the essay this year, do they?
No, I don't think they ever do. It says just S1 on the website.
It says here, 70% of the cohort were male. Is this true? Yes. Is that for E&M? I know the statistics are. I think PP is something like 66%.
I don't know the exact figures, but yes, very male dominated. Do not let that put you off. Please don't let that put you off. Like, I found it very off-putting thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be doing PP with a load of men from those backgrounds. But honestly, don't go for it. Yeah, it can be really intimidating being a woman, being a minority, but please don't let that put you off. But yeah, I think we're leaving shortly then. Cool. Thanks everyone. Is it harder to get in if you're a girl? No, absolutely not.
No, it's just a case of applications.
And go into the interview with white man confidence. Definitely do that, but absolutely not harder. Don't let it put you off at all. But yeah. From those backgrounds, I apologise. That was probably not the way of phrasing it.
I think we're
cool. We can.
I think we're going to head back essentially. Well,
cool.
It was 60 seconds, wasn't it, a while ago?
Yeah. Let's do leave breakout.
Right, I'll leave the recording then.